I know when I'm being called a coward. Alright, I found this new channel called Kings and Generals, and they had this video called How Europe Colonized Asia Pacific War. This was not the video that was meant to be sent to me, but it was sent to me anyways, and then they corrected and sent another video, but I'm watching the first video they sent because they sent that one and it looked interesting, so we're going to watch that one right now. You guys ready? Should I do a shot before? I can't drink a whole lot today. You know, I gotta go out, you know. I'm a driver's ed teacher, so can't do that. That wasn't true. Ugh. Okay. Let's do the video. Hot damn. All right.
Once a land of ancient empires and legendary rulers,
I want to know who does the narrations for Kings and Generals, and I want him to narrate a day in the life of me. I just want to walk around and have him saying, yes, and he was walking down the street, and I'll be like, I was walking down the street, because that guy's voice is awesome.
Asia saw itself turn into a colony of the expanding European powers in the early modern period. Drawn to the Asian silk and spice trade, their colonization efforts were initially directed to harness the continent's economic power. Eventually, the European states started to use more and more force, and by the start of the 20th century, the Eastern world would be almost entirely in the hands of colonial empires. Welcome to our quick rundown on European expansion in Asia and the Pacific. This is a prelude video to our series on the Pacific War. We'll release weekly episodes with events that started 80 years prior. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss them. We're going to talk about events that happened 80 years ago in this series, but we are still in 2021, and in 2021, personal grooming and good hygiene are a must for a refined man. And the sponsor of this video, Manscaped, is here to...
I like how it's got that break there. It's very thoughtful. That wasn't me, that was the cats.
In 1492, the European discovery of the New World ushered a new age of maritime exploration. For the last century, Portuguese explorers had been already trying to bypass Muslim territories to trade directly with West Africa while also attempting to reach the Indies and its lucrative spice trade. The Portuguese sent an expedition into African waters, at last discovering that the Indian Ocean was accessible through the Cape of Good Hope. On May 20th, 1498, an expedition led by Vasco da Gama finally managed to reach India by sea. Thus, the Portuguese colonial empire was born. Soon they established entrepôts in Kochi, Calicut and Goa, later expanding their Estado da India across the region, with crucial acquisitions of Diu, Daman, Pulicat, Colombo and Chittagong, among others. In Southeast Asia, the Portuguese captured Malacca and established settlements in the Spice Islands of Solor, Ternate and Ambon, as well.
I didn't realize Portugal was all over the place, weren't they? Ooh, Christmas Island. I wonder if it's always snowing there. Yeah, I didn't
on
realize
East
they were
Timor
all over.
and Makassar.
Sorry, I didn't realize they were all over the place. That's crazy. Props to them, I guess, though. They're a little tiny country that... Saigon. Brunei. Sorry, I'm just naming countries.
But they also disrupted and diverted trade in the region, and spread Christianity in eastern Indonesia. Commercial contact was established with mainland realms in Southeast Asia as well, and in Burma, Portuguese mercenaries became essential for the expansion of the Tuangu Empire. In China, after a long period of conflict, the Portuguese would be allowed to establish an entrepot in Macau, while in Japan, they benefited from the state of civil war, the Sengoku Jidai, and the Chinese embargo to monopolize trade between Japan and Europe.
Holy cow.
the Portuguese also managed to spread Christianity in Japan, successfully converting one of the daimyos to Catholicism, who granted them the small fishing village of Nagasaki to act as a center of trade in the region. Although direct control of the village ended just a couple of years later, Nagasaki would nevertheless remain the main port of call for the Portuguese ships, thanks to its predominantly Christian population.
That probably ended in the 1945 time span, I would guess. Sorry.
Meanwhile, thanks to the Magellan-Elcano circumnavigation, the Crown of Spain managed to discover and gradually colonize the Philippine archipelago. The Spaniards also established themselves in the Spice Island of Tidore, sparking a decade of conflicts with neighboring Portuguese Ternate that would be concluded with the Treaty of Zaragoza in 1529.
I apologize. Was Magellan the one who... Yeah, didn't Magellan take part in some... I watched the video. You think I remember. I don't. Magellan helped take part in some battle and he was killed. Am I right or am I wrong?
Granting the Philippines to Spain and the Moluccas to Portugal. From their center in Manila, Spanish colonists would go on to settle Guam and the Mariana, Caroline and Palau Islands. In 1580, the establishment of the Iberian Union led to the decline of the Portuguese Empire in the east, as England, France and the Dutch Republic began to create their own overseas empires. The Dutch would be the main culprits for the downfall of the Portuguese, successfully attacking their possessions in Asia and eventually taking control of Malacca, Ceylon, the Moluccas, the southern Malabar coast, and regions of Coromandel and Surat. The initial course of action taken by the Dutch East Indies would be to found a chartered company, the VOC, and establish a colonial centre in the city of Jakarta, which the Dutch renamed to Batavia. From there, the Dutch would continue to assault the commercial interests of the Portuguese, slowly expanding their control over Southeast Asia, leaving only East Timor and Macau in the hands of the Portuguese. They would also colonize the southern tip of the island of Formosa, modern-day Taiwan, to use as headquarters for attacks against the Philippines. In response, the Spaniards established their own colony in the north of the island, although it was soon overtaken by the Dutch. The fate of Formosa would be finally decided when the Chinese warlord Kashinga invaded in 1661, managing to take full control of the island. Meanwhile in Japan, the Tokugawa shogunate started to show animosity towards the religious intentions of the Portuguese, leading to their expulsion in 1639, and the establishment of the Sakoku isolationist policy in Japan. Yet again, the Dutch benefited from this to establish a monopoly over Japanese trade, being the only European power to operate in Japan from the port of Deshima in Nagasaki.
I'm going to guess they were able to do that because they had no interest in colonizing an area, you know, for them. Kind of like sending a bunch of ships, like calling it like the Mayflower or something like that, and then landing there and then getting out. I'm looking at all this and I'm thinking, man, I would hate that. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a long line of white people that kind of did the same thing. Water under the bridge, or bridge over the moon, whatever it goes.
With the fall of the Portuguese hegemony over the East, the British and French empires would also start establishing their own chartered companies in the 17th century. Whereas the French arrived late and only established a few colonies in India, the British East India Company quickly set out to found trading posts in Sumatra, Bengal and India. From there, they established their control over Bengal, established their first colony in Malaysia with the acquisition of Penang Island, and managed to expel the Dutch from Ceylon. Once the British had established a foothold over this island, they soon warred against the Kingdom of Kandy and established a protectorate over the entirety of Ceylon and the neighbouring Maldives. Following a series of conflicts with the French and Dutch empires, the British would manage to take most of their possessions in India, becoming the dominant European power in the region. Within a century, most of the Indian subcontinent gradually fell under the rule of the British East India Company, which promoted the establishment of the British Raj in 1858 to assume direct control over India. In Burma, relations with the British East India Company had always been tense after the Burmese annexation of Arakan, leading to a war in 1824. This was one of the most expensive operations of the Chartered Company, but in the end, it saw the British takeover of Manipur, Assam, Arakan and Tenasserim, as well as the birth of British supremacy in Asian coastal waters. A second war broke out in 1852, in which the British annexed the province of Lower Burma, leaving the Burmese state in shambles.
And I'm sure I've heard this before, but what all did India have? Was it spices and silk? Because everyone flocked there. So what all did they have that was just pillaged? Just asking. I'm asking for a friend. Clearly I know, but you know, he doesn't.
In the 19th century, the British also...
That's not me. Oh, okay. It's an ad.
Feeling lonely and looking for a significant someone, but dating sites don't work for you? Tired of scrolling, browsing, ignored messages, and dull dates? What if you look for...
Damn it, I'm trying to drink whiskey.
In the 19th century, the British also decided to take a more expansionist role in Malaysia, sponsoring a coup in the Sultanate of Johor and founding the colony of Singapore. They would then negotiate with the Dutch for the cession of Malacca and the remaining Dutch forts in India in exchange for all British possessions in Sumatra and the recognition of Dutch rights to Indonesia. British Malaya would continue to grow across the century as the Straits settlements were established and the Malay sultanates were gradually annexed as protectorates. At the same time, the British established a protectorate over the Raj of Sarawak in northeastern Borneo, and then established a colony on the Labuan Islands. Meanwhile, the French would take great interest in the region of Indochina. After enjoying very good relations with Vietnam, the French Empire would start to continually intervene in the country in the 19th century, culminating with an attack on Turan and the founding of the colony of Cochin China. In 1867, all of southern Vietnam fell under French control, and a protectorate over Cambodia was officially established. The French would go on to establish protectorates over the islands of New Caledonia, Tahiti, Tahuata, and Wallis and Futuna. Initially, the Tahitians would offer strong resistance against the colonists, yet they would be subdued at last, and the French would go on to expand across modern-day French Polynesia. With the British, they would also establish an Anglo-French condominium over the New Hebrides, with one English side and the other one French. Meanwhile in China, there was an increasing demand for opium that was strongly damaging the Chinese population, prompting the Daoguang Emperor to end the opium trade with the Europeans. In response, Britain sent a military expedition in 1839, thus starting the first of the Opium Wars. The Chinese would be defeated in a humiliating way, and as a consequence, they would have to open their foreign trade with Europe and to cede the island of Hong Kong to the British Empire. Furthermore, China was left in a state of social unrest, and it would need the help of French and British troops to quell the Taiping and Nian rebellions. In 1856, another incident over opium would renew war with the British Empire. Joined by the United States and the French and Russian empires, the British would win again, further opening commercial areas in China, legalizing the opium trade, and acquiring the Kowloon Peninsula next to Hong Kong.
So the British sent troops there because they were saying, hey, opium is hurting our people. And England, the British said, we don't care. And then demanded that they allowed opium to be sold into the country. This is a long time ago, 100, 200 years ago. 150 years ago? 175 years ago? We get it, Chris. And so, and then we got involved to help them sell opium to the Chinese people. Okay.
The Russian Empire, which over the last centuries had been expanding across Central Asia and Siberia, would also go on to annex the entire region of Outer Manchuria. In 1884, the French Empire would obtain control over northern Vietnam following their victory over China in another war, thus consolidating their colony in Indochina. But the success of the French also threatened the British population in the region, prompting them to declare war against the Burmese and annex the province of Upper Burma. This left the Kingdom of Siam entirely surrounded by European powers, and the Siamese would have to relinquish some territories on the frontiers to maintain their independence. Thus, the British received the Shan states and some possessions in Malaysia, while the French enlarged their Indo-Chinese colony with the addition of modern-day Laos.
Jesus.
In the 19th century, the Dutch also started to gradually expand their East Indies across maritime Southeast Asia, and by 1920 they had acquired the modern-day borders of Indonesia. Meanwhile, the British expanded into Brunei and North Borneo, and managed to colonize Fiji, Christmas Island, Cocos Islands, the Pitcairn Islands, the Union Islands, the Southern Solomon Islands, and the Gilbert and Ellice Islands. By the 20th century, Great Britain also colonized the islands of Tonga and Niue, the Phoenix Islands, and the southeastern side of the island of New Guinea.
Look at Australia and New Zealand, both just sitting there looking at everything going, God damn, we have no part of this.
Yet the crown jewel of their oceanic empire would be the colonies of Australia and New Zealand, from where the British controlled all their Pacific possessions.
Of course.
That's
right, Australia was a colony of them, weren't they? That's right. Good job, Chris. You remembered after they said it.
The century, the assassination of German missionaries in China would spark another conflict with European powers, culminating with a scramble for concessions in 1898 that awarded the Germans with a lease over the Jiazhou Bay and Tianjin, that granted the British a lease over Weihai Wei and the new territories of Hong Kong, and that gave a lease over Guangzhou One to the French. The recently established German Empire also colonized the northeastern part of New Guinea, the Bismarck Archipelago, the Northern Solomon Islands, Western Samoa, and Nauru. Finally, the entrance of the United States into the Pacific, the last main foreign player in the region, would coincide with the downfall of the Spanish Empire. In 1898, the same year that the US annexed Hawaii, American intervention in Cuba led to the ultimate conquest of the Philippines and Guam in the Pacific. Weakened from their defeat against the US, the Spaniards could no longer protect their Pacific possessions, including the Mariana, Caroline, and Palau Islands, so in 1889 they sold these territories to the German Empire for a significant sum of gold marks, ending the Spanish presence in the region. The start of the next century would also see an increasing American interest in the Pacific, with the colonization of Wake Island, the Midway Atoll, the Johnson Atoll, Eastern Samoa, and the Howland and Baker Islands, thus completing the colonization of Oceania. As you can see, most of Southeast Asia and Oceania were left in the hands of Western powers by the turn of the 20th century. Our Prelude series, that will soon morph into the weekly coverage of the Pacific War, will continue next week as we observe how the Japanese turned from an isolationist state into a regional power in the East, laying the initial groundwork for the rise of the Japanese Empire. So make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see the next.
That was really good. I always thought, and this is stupid of me, I always thought that all these were Japan. But apparently I was very much wrong. Interesting. Japan and the UK fascinate me because how small they are, but how powerful they were. And I'm you know, World War II. Even though we fought them, but they just, you know, England is fascinating because of just how much of a world power they were, considering how small of a country they were. And then Japan fascinates me because of just how mentally strong they were. Just this refusal to give up. And I don't know where I stand on the nuke with them. This is completely, it's unrelated, but, you know, Pacific War kind of thing. I don't know where I stand with the nuke on them. I understand why it was done. I don't know. I don't know where I stand on that. It did say that potentially millions of more casualties in terms of us fighting, you know, not just the US versus Japan, but, you know, the British were just like Winston Churchill said, we're going hand in hand with them. You know, they were going to be there. More than likely Australia would have been there because they're always with us. Past 100 years they've been with us on almost everything. So it did save a lot of lives, but at the same time, I don't know. I don't know where I feel. We're allies with them now, so that's all that matters. Hopefully it'll never happen again, because Japan's good. Oh well. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and end this here because I've got some other videos to do. But just a random thing. Random statement for you. And that is that if it's a full moon and there's a goat on the street, I want you to knock twice on the door. But if there's an eagle, then shit in your neighbor's shoes. Wait, what?